I'll just let the participants in when you're ready.
Okay, just give me 1 sec. I just need to do something really quick, and then
Okay.
I will share again.
Is it fine? I'll let them in. Is it fine? I'll let them in if it's okay for you.
Oh, I just realized I turned my mic off. That's why you didn't hear
Ah, okay.
me. Let's see here.
I will do a short intro first.
Mhm.
So, welcome everyone to the. Oh, let me just start the. So, welcome everyone to the Model UNESCO's online webinar, technical online webinar on the ethics of neurotechnology. And we are very excited to have first invited Dr. Geffory to talk about clinical cases of neurotechnologies in Hong Kong. And then the next session will begin in 5 past 5 p.m. in Hong Kong time, where we invited Dr. Dafna to talk about UNESCO's progress on neurotechnology. So we hope that these two technical webinars will help you to prepare for the upcoming Model UNESCO conference and also help you in furthering your interest in such fields. So let us now invite Dr. Geffory to start the first session.
Thank you, everyone. Wait, I am trying. Oh, how do I move to the next slide? Oh, whoops. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I also want to thank UNESCO for the opportunity to speak here today and share some of the insights I've learned through my years of clinical practice. Just start with a quick introduction first. So I'm Dr. Geffory Mok. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist. I was trained in the US. I graduated with a PsyD, a doctorate in psychology and clinical psychology with a specialization in clinical neuropsychology. And I did my clinical training in a lot of places in the US and in Canada, such as in various psychiatric hospitals and community healthcare centers, in hospital-based specialty clinics like Alzheimer's clinics or rehabilitation centers all across North America. I'm currently licensed for practice in clinical psychology and neuropsychology in Ontario, Canada, and in Michigan. I'm also obviously a part of the Hong Kong Institute of Clinical Psychology and Division of Clinical Psychology for HKPS. Right now, in terms of work, I mainly do private practice work in private practice clinics. And so here is a brief plan for today, right? First, I want to give a brief description of what is neuropsychology and what a neuropsychologist does to give, to set the table so that it's what we talk about makes some sense on what I'm seeing and why I see things that way, right? And then I'll briefly go over the state of neurotechnologies in Hong Kong as it relates to what a neuropsychologist is typically exposed to. And then afterwards, I plan to spend most of the time discussing real life clinical cases, real life situations that illustrate the challenges and complexities with regards to ethics in with neurotechnology. Okay. So what is a clinical neuropsychologist, right? It's a clinical neuropsychologist is a clinical psychologist with an additional subspecialty in neuropsychology. So both of these professions are trained in assessing and treating psychological disorders, right? But the difference is a neuropsychologist goes through additional training to understand neuroanatomy, neuropathology, neurocognitive testing, and then we use these tools to assess and measure cognitive abilities across a bunch of different domains, such as memory, attention, processing speed, spatial reasoning, and verbal abilities, right? And so from the perspective of a neuropsychologist, right? The neurotechnologies that are relevant in our field of work, is mainly split into two big categories, right? One is the imaging technologies and the therapeutic technologies. So the imaging technologies, right? These are the technologies that help us better understand what's going on in the brain, helps us better understand symptoms of our patients, and help us think about what we can help them what we can do to help them, right? And examples include CTs, right? And CTs are basically a bunch of X-rays that you put through a computer program that takes all the X-ray data and then uses it to develop what an approximation of what the brain looks like. So it's not literally a picture, but they generate what they think a picture of the brain would look like, right? Similarly, MRIs, right? They also basically all these imaging technologies, right? That's what they do. They develop what pictures of what they think the brain looks like using different technologies. MRIs use magnetic resonance to develop high resolution of pictures of what the brain should look like. So it's better at picking up smaller changes. Okay, that was a little funny. Anyways, so it's better at picking up these smaller differences, right? Then there's fMRIs. fMRIs, they're your functional MRIs. They map blood flow in the brain, and you use that to extrapolate what parts of the brain are being activated for what tasks, or when you give them a medication, how does it change your brain activation, right? That's what it helps us do. Then you have DTI, diffusion tensor imaging. That's basically for that, you're measuring water flow in your brain. The idea is that water is flowing, if it flows along the white matter tracks, right? And so because water is flowing that way, so if you track the path of the water, what you will be able to get is you're able to detect these small differences, these small little potholes, you can think of it that way, of uh, uh, on the white matter tracks, which indicates neuron damage. So these are just some of the imaging technologies that are available. There's obviously more SPECT scans, PET scans, all that stuff, right? So these are just some examples, right? Then we have the therapeutic technologies, right? So we have stuff like EEGs. So EEGs, it's both imaging. Well, it's not imaging; it's a diagnostic tool, but also a therapeutic tool, right? Because it's used to measure brain activity in real time. You put electrodes on your head, and it's very good at detecting uh, brain activity in real time. And so, for therapeutic purposes, we use that in neurofeedback as well. So, neurofeedback is basically you put a consumer type EEG on your head, and then it tells you basically your brain activation patterns, right? So you get very immediate feedback, and that helps you train your brain to fire in ways that you want it to fire. You can think of it that way, and that's how neurofeedback basically works. There is TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and that is something that also uses a lot of magnets. It uses magnets to stimulate neurons in the brain, which can help with various conditions like depression. Depression that's treatment resistant, not very responsive to medications. So that's the use for that. Then there's deep brain stimulation, and that's primarily used for Parkinson's or epilepsy. So how does that work? That works by basically inserting an electrode in the brain and then using that to regulate brain activity. So because that's what epilepsy is, right? It's abnormal firing patterns in the brain, right? And so the electrodes, they will send out signals to help regulate the pattern of the firing in the brain. Okay? And these are just some examples of the common usages of neurotechnologies in clinical practice. So in clinical practice, I think like for me, I think it's most illustrative if I share some actual real life cases of what I've seen to illustrate points of the difficulties of ethics when we're talking about neurotechnologies, right? So this is one case study, right? This study involves a 12-year-old boy. Parents took him to see me and reported significant behavioral problems at school and at home. So it's the typical stuff. He couldn't sit still, running around all the time, can't focus, couldn't do homework, all that stuff, right? And so, we did an assessment, and the assessment revealed, had moderate ADHD. Not surprising, it's very common nowadays, right? And so obviously afterwards, we talk about what we can do, medications, lifestyle changes, helping him practice skills to better use his attention. These are the commonly accepted, the well-validated treatment for ADHD, right? So the issue though was parents were very against trialing medications. And so they looked around and then they found neurofeedback training for ADHD. And they decided to go ahead with it. So why why didn't I recommend that all the way at the beginning, right? Well, the reason is because neurofeedback training is still something that's relatively new. It's something that I think holds a lot of promise, but all the big research studies, all the big meta-analyses, they don't quite show very consistent results. So some studies you get these great results, and some studies you're basically getting nothing. And because of that, it's very at this point it's hard to just full on recommend doing that. But nevertheless, there is evidence support showing that that does help, right? And so they went ahead with it. And from what I heard, it actually did pretty well for them. They, actually helped their child. So perfectly, things worked out well in this case, right? So that's a positive example of, new technologies and how it can help things and can help people. Let's look at another case. So this other case, is quite a while back. This was back when I was working in hospitals, right? And so this is a 50-something-year-old woman, and she had this very rapid decline in her everyday functioning. So she was having problems just keeping herself well groomed, cooking for herself, just going out and to do like grocery shopping. So it's really, and it was a really rapid decline. I think it was within the span of like months. She went from a fully independent woman to having a lot just issues living by herself, right? So when I assessed her, right, obviously there was like very, very significant decline in her cognitive abilities. No surprise, given her everyday functioning. And then the full medical workup with the whole team showed that this woman has Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD. And that is a very rapid declining type of neurocognitive disorder. So you're going really downhill really, really fast. And there's, as far as I'm aware, there is no treatment to slow or stop it or reverse it. There's really nothing for it. And obviously that's what I told her, right? I told her family at that point because she was very impaired. And it's obviously it was very difficult chat, and they had a lot of difficulty taking that in, especially the patient's mother. So the patient's mother then went online and started looking at all the things, looking at all these the most cutting edge stuff, the stuff that people are saying can help in these situations, right? And she came across this clinic in the U.S. I can't remember the name, or I can't remember what exactly they were offering because it's been a very long time. But I do recall at the time when I checked it out, I looked at it and there was no empirical support for that treatment, right? And so I had that discussion with them. I let them know what I thought, and the husband was very against going because he believed what I was telling him, but the mom was holding on to the fact that this place says they can cure my daughter. This place says this, like, if we pay them whatever they're asking, they'll bring my daughter back. And so at the end of the day, obviously, right, the mom won out, and then they went to the US to get that treatment. Haven't had contact with them since, but I highly doubt that that treatment worked, because I recently looked it up again, and again, I looked at the literature. There's no treatments for it. And this was like at least 7 years ago, this case. So why do I bring up these cases, right? Because I think these cases help us think about that conflict we have between staying on the cutting edge technologies, providing and hopefully using that to provide the best care possible and improve people's lives, versus the need to stick to evidence-based practice. Because in this situation, right, you can see there's times when it can be helpful, like with the neurofeedback for ADHD. And then there are times when it's just false hope. You're just giving people unrealistic expectations that they're not going to be able to live up to. And it's going to hurt them financially, and more importantly, emotionally, when they find out all of this that they try never works, right? And so these are big things that we need to think about. How do we encourage innovation without violating the do no harm mandate to society? How do we make sure we keep on improving things, but not oversell? Here's another case. This case is a bit more recent. I think within maybe 4 years ago, I think about. So in this case, there's a woman in her late 60s, has significant cognitive symptoms, with rapid forgetting was the top most prevalent symptom, right? And so that's pretty clear cut, rapid forgetting, it's late 60s, it's Alzheimer's, no doubt about it, right? So same thing, we end up talking about the standard treatments for it, right? Includes lifestyle factors to prevent further decline and hopefully slow it down, because we know a lot of times people with Alzheimer's is not pure Alzheimer's. You have cardiovascular factors that make things worse for them, right? And so you try to do things, whatever you can, and try to slow it down. There are some medications you can use, anticholinesterase inhibitors, and these are things that can help improve cognitive function in the short term. Long term, the decline, you can't really stop it, right? But the goal is to maximize functioning for as long as you can. So that was the main thing we talked about. So again, family, very worried about this lady, did a lot of research and went and looked up all the cutting edge stuff for Alzheimer's treatment, and they found TMS. At the time, TMS is really, really new. I think they were starting to have studies that looked into it, and it's showing promise. And I think it's within the years since then, it's become more widely accepted. There's been more research, even though it still hasn't really been fully accepted yet for treatment for Alzheimer's. They're looking into it, I know, in the US and in Canada. Not sure where the Hong Kong is at, but research is still ongoing, basically, on to confirm that this is actually something that's good. But regardless, back then, it was already available in Hong Kong, even though it hasn't really been very widely accepted, right? And so they found this clinic, and then they ended up doing it. And from what I heard from them afterwards, it seems like they at least believed that it slowed the decline. And so they kept on doing it. Sounds great, right? But then there's the issue with cost. It's really expensive. A course of treatment was something like 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. And I think that's what a course of treatment was, like 4 to 6 sessions. I think I could be wrong here. And the kicker is, you don't just do this once. Remember, Alzheimer's right now, it's not something that's curable or reversible. All TMS, what the research tells us with the TMS is that it slows down the cognitive decline, which is still very valuable. But that means they have to keep doing it at 100,000 Hong Kong dollars a pop. Which really gets at another concern we have with neurotechnologies these days, right? Equity versus access. So we know the public sector in basically every country in the world is underwater. There's not enough funding for all the health problems that we face nowadays. Partly because I think we have a better understanding of diseases and illnesses, and we're trying to treat more things. And I think partly, sorry about that. So partly because I think we're trying to treat more things. And then, but also partly because we're just living longer. And as we all know, when you get longer, when you live longer, you're not getting any healthier. So you're running into more and more problems that require healthcare. And so, in Hong Kong especially, right? More and more people turn to the private sector to get treatment in a timely manner. Like in the example I just gave you, right? It was not available at the time. It was only available through private practices, and they had to pay a lot more money for it, and they're probably still paying a lot of money for it, but they got it and they are benefiting from it. So then it starts, when you look at it like this, it starts looking like neurotechnology. Is it starting to become a luxury good? Is it something that we are really, is it something that everyone is benefiting from? Or is it something that we're getting unequal benefits from? That's for the private sector part. And then for the public sector part, right? As someone that works on the front lines, right? And having worked in hospitals before, I know it's really difficult. I can remember back when I was in hospitals, like my wait list to see me was the wait list for seeing me was something. Okay. The wait list was something like a year and a half to 2 years, right? And so, and that's for me. So I imagined it's equivalent or even worse for a lot of other services in hospitals around the world, right? So then we need to think about how do we make this all these technological developments, how do we make it something that benefits everyone instead of just a very select few? Next case that I want to share. So this was a very recent case. This was like sometime in like December, I think. So this patient came in, 65-year-old man, came in a wheelchair, came in with not his family, his best friends and his best friend's family. Came in, he has a history of schizophrenia since his late 20s, has been on antipsychotics throughout his whole life, has not been able to work since the early 30s. And I checked with a treating psychiatrist, right? And their opinion was that, that he was on pretty strong medications, and having been on it for so long, it was causing a lot of neuropsychiatric symptoms. It was causing, tremors. It was causing him to have difficulty speaking properly. So it was very difficult for him to communicate with people at all. And he was trying to write a will because he had very significant assets, like something like 20 million Hong Kong dollars left. And he wanted to make sure it went to where he wanted to go, right? He wanted to, give it to his friend and his family who has been taking care of him for the last 10, 15 years. They literally go to his house every day, help him change, help him bathe, help him with all sorts of stuff, right? So when they went to the lawyer was obviously very concerned, right? Because here is a 60-something-year-old man who comes in a wheelchair. He can't really say anything. He can't write. He had really a lot of difficulty um, um, letting his wishes down. He could speak, but it was very difficult to understand. His writing was very distorted. So it took a lot of guessing either way, right? And so the lawyer referred him to me for a testamentary capacity assessment to make sure that he has the ability to understand his will and to understand what a will is, to understand what he's giving away, and all that stuff that's needed to meet the criteria for having testamentary capacity. Okay. And so this was a big challenge. He can't write legibly. His speaking is heavily distorted. And so it took a lot of time, took a lot of effort, and it took a lot of double checking, triple checking, asking him again and again, double checking um, what he's trying to say, checking understanding. It took a lot of that, many, many hours for me to come to opinion that he meets criteria for testamentary capacity. He should be able to direct where his money goes. So we were able to do that at the end, but that is something that takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of time to do. And a lot of times, a lot of people who have that need might not be able to find a person that will be able to do that with them. Because if you just look at him, he's not talking properly. He can't really write. It would be pretty easy to just say he can't decide what to do with his money, right? But then I think back to uh, a news article I was reading about before a couple years ago, where they were developing BCIs, so brain computer interfaces. So what they did is they attached stuff to your skull to read signals in your motor cortex. The motor cortex is the part of your brain that basically encodes your muscle movements. It basically plans out and tells your muscles what to do, sends out the signals for what to do, right? And so they figured out a way to tap into that part and read what a person wants to say. Because the idea is that that area of the brain is intact and the problems with movement are in some other place, right? And so they were able to tap into that part of the brain and help a person speak again. And I was just thinking at the time, if only that was available for us here, that would have made things a lot easier. That would have made it much easier for anyone in a similar situation who has these significant motor impairments to actually be able to convey their thoughts and beliefs. But there's an issue, right? So that study we talked about, right? It was done in the US, right? And so obviously that study was in English. That the person spoke English, and then the technology and the strategy and everything they'd used to uh, to set the person up so that they can speak again was in English. But we know English and Chinese are very different, and this brings us to this point: diversity in culture. What we know is that neurotechnologies and the algorithms that are developed, they they are developed by the population that developed it, right? By the main big body of people that are developing it. So in the US, they are the English-speaking population, right? So they're not going to be doing stuff for the minorities in their country, for example. There's probably not a lot of support at the time, at the beginning at least, to develop these for, let's say, Spanish-speaking people or maybe Chinese-speaking people. And I looked it up. They weren't trying to develop that for Chinese. And afterwards, I think last year in China, they were able to break through with that a bit more. And it's because brains and brain activity patterns are not universal across cultures. With English, we know English is a language that's very dependent on phonemic fluency, right? So it's very dependent on your knowledge of letter-sound relationships. There's some irregularities there, but by and large, there are rules between, if it's this letter, it's this sound. If it's these letters in this combination, it's this sound, right? You don't have that in Chinese. With Chinese, you have, it's more morphological, right? You need to look at it in terms of like the character. You need to more or less memorize what a character is, and then have that sound encoded, and then you need to get the tone right as well. Whereas in English, there's a lot more leeway with as long as you get one of the similar phonemes correct, right? You're very likely to be able to get the word correct because there's multiple phonemes that build up. Phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. So, for instance, pa is a phoneme, right? So, papa, right? So that makes a word. You don't have that in Chinese. Each character has its own sound, and depending on the tone inflection, that word can be wildly different. And so what they developed back in the US is not usable directly for the Chinese-speaking population. So the main point I'm trying to get at here is there has to be a concerted effort to develop these neurotechnologies for people in specific cultures. Because if you just let it be dependent on the countries that are already developing it, for instance, US and China, there's not a lot of incentive for them to go beyond that. I hope there is, but there isn't, at least not in the near future. They're always obviously going to do stuff that helps their population first, which makes complete sense. So how do we encourage that? That's something we need to think about. And the last one I want to share with you guys is, I don't even know if I can call this a case study or not, but this is definitely a personal experience of mine, right? So as a neuropsychologist, I collaborate a lot with psychiatrists and neurologists in hospital settings. They send me referrals about questions they want answered. I do an assessment. I try to answer their referral questions to the best of my abilities. And then we go from there to figure out how to, do the best for each patient, right? So one time, I can't even really remember how, I somehow found out that their test data, like they were using test data from my reports in their research. I think it's because they didn't have a neuropsychologist to collect the data. So it was weird when I saw them do research and they have neuropsych data to help them do their research. Then I asked around and confirmed that that's what they were doing. They were pulling data from our reports, right? Which became a thing we had to talk about. And I think what ended up was that basically by the letter of the law, it was fine because the report was given to them as part of their health information, and then they identified it and used that as a research in the research projects, right? But for me, it still left a pretty bad taste in my mouth because well, I was the one collecting the data. And because I wasn't planning to do any research at the time, right? I didn't go over consent over research stuff with them at all. So they didn't consent to that at all, at least in the way I'm looking at it. Which brings us to concerns about mental privacy, right? So brain data is very sensitive data, right? And so there is a really big risk of the data being used for self-interest. Another example is what they call neuromarketing. So I don't know if this is something that is actually commonly known, but a lot of the big companies nowadays, they actually use a lot of the technologies that we talked about earlier. They use that to get a better understanding of how people's brains work so that they can identify biomarkers that points towards, hey, I want to buy this. And so they use that to trial a lot of their advertising stuff to trigger that feeling, that desire to buy things, which again raises really a lot of concerns for me because we're starting to get to the point where we're bypassing conscious thought. Obviously, we're not completely bypassing it. You can still have conscious control over, I want that, but I don't want to buy it. But this is starting to this line is starting to get really blurry when we're having companies literally look at your brain activation and then being like, hey, this is how we're going to make your brain fire so that you're going to buy stuff from us. And what do we do about that? Where are we going to draw the line? Again, very difficult question. And so some final thoughts, right? And I hope that the way I structured this talk was to bring up these ethical challenges that I have seen in clinical practice and my personal experience to raise discussion for everyone that's listening. Because the reality of ethics is there generally isn't a clear answer for everything. The best thing we can do is think through things from different perspectives to get a more comprehensive viewpoint of what's going on and pick one that makes the most sense and hope for the best. And so I hope this chat helps raise some discussion or some provoke some thinking. In my perspective, though, one thing I think that it will definitely be important is the need for stronger government oversight and to take the lead in developing neurotechnologies. Because if we just let the private sector take the lead, then it's going to be about what gets monetized. What is the best, what's the easiest to get monetized, and not necessarily what's best for all of society. All right, and that brings me to the end of my chat. So I think we should open up the time for the floor for questions.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Dr. Mo, for your amazing presentation. And I really like how you highlighted all of the concerns through case studies. And so from what I've listened, so one of the concerns I talked about is in equity and inclusion, and the other one is in diversity and culture. And the third one is in mental privacy, right? So I do think our audiences could have some active discussion and Q&A on these three aspects. So also, if you do have any questions regarding the application of neurotechnologies in the field, please do. You could ask questions through raising your hand or typing in the chat room. So let's see. Does anybody have any questions? I think they are a little bit shy. It's okay. Let me just, I do have a question for Dr. Mark. Since you were one of the judges of our university level multi-UNESCO conference on the ethics of neurotechnology, which was hosted in December 2025, what do you think are some highlights of the previous conference? Some highlights of the student ideas that you think could as could inspire our this group of secondary school students in their kind of conference or in their research.
Give me a second. It's been a while since we had that competition. I think it's about was it like a year ago or was it like 6 months ago? I can't remember. It's been a while.
It's like 4 months. So we had it
4 months?
December. Yeah.
It's only been 4 months. Wow. Okay. So one thing that I remember quite well that I think everyone hit upon was that everyone hit upon the question about equity and access, about making sure neurotechnology is something that is for everyone and not for a select few, which is much easier said than done, right? And so that's probably if there needs to be just one big takeaway, that might be like probably the biggest one, making sure all the things that we do, it's really something that benefits everyone and not just the people that can fork out $100,000 every 2 months, because who can do that? I can't. Personally, though, one thing that I hope, on my perspective, that I hope everyone can really keep in mind is not getting caught up in that in sort of this shiny object syndrome, some people might call it, right? And that the point I was talking about was making sure focusing on evidence-based practice versus cutting edge technologies. That making sure that things you do, it has to be something that's empirically backed, something that we know works, something that at the very least, even if we're still in the development phases, right? Making sure that we have some evidence to believe that why it should work and not just doing things for the sake of doing things.
So I'll just answer a quick question in the chat regarding the administration of the teams. So you are supposed to sign up in teams of 2 and you create your own teams to sign up. So it's not us who create teams for you. So you are supposed to sign up in teams of 2 already. Yeah. So yes, does the audiences have any other questions regarding this topic? So we do have a question from Ingrid. Should the use of neurotechnology be allowed for individuals unable to give consent?
Unable to give consent. Okay, so very good question. So right now we actually have a mechanism to do that, right? Because we have a mechanism for secondary decision makers. So for example, if you end up in a hospital and then you're like in a coma and then they need to operate, they need to ask a secondary a decision maker. If they can't find one, the government will appoint someone who is obligated by law to act in your interest. Okay, so that's probably not the biggest problem because there's a mechanism for that. It's not perfect, but you got to make do with what you've got. And I can't think of a better one than that for now. My question, I think the bigger problem is what happens because neurotechnology is progressing all the time, right? We're talking about implanting BCIs in the head that can read what you speak. Like you can use to operate like mechanical arms and stuff. They have that now, right? And so we can believe that in the future, within the next 10 years, that's probably going to be something that's going to be starting to be used for clinical purposes. So the question that I think is that we need to address is what happens if a person is unable to give consent and then someone gave consent for them and then they wake up and they're like, I don't want that. What do we do then? Some things can be reversible, right? But then, for example, if you're implanting something in your brain, depending on where you implant it, are you really going to open up the brain again to pull it back out? It can cause a lot of damage. So I think that's probably the more interesting, but also the more difficult question. What if a person was incapable, someone gave consent for them, and then they're capable again, and they don't want that? And I don't have an answer.
Hi, Dr. Dafna. I see that you are already in the Zoom meeting and you have already raised your hand. And you have also raised your hand. Do you have any comments on this question
Yes,
also?
yes, I would like to add to what the Dr. Mok just said, because indeed it's one of the most important and tricky questions. And I'm really sorry because I don't manage to put my image on.
Oh, have
But
you, is your camera working? Have you tried to set the camera?
I suppose because I changed the background. But let me answer the question. I don't want to interrupt the
Okay.
flow of the conversation because that's more important. I think there are lots of questions on informed consent in the medical and outside the medical, which is I wanted to also to I will address that in my presentation. But to add to what Dr. Mook said, that's why we also have what is called just to try to avoid such a complicated situation that he described that can in fact indeed arrive that we did something and maybe the person didn't want, but that's why there is also this mechanism of the advanced directives in which people leave their wishes in case there is anything, in case I will be sick like this, in case I will not be able to decide, I want you to know that I want this and this, and I will not want this and this. And that's a mechanism that also exists in many countries. In some, it's only a written thing, it's only verbal, sometimes it's with notary. That really changes and it varies among countries, no? But that's another mechanism to try to as much as possible because informed consent can only be given by the individual. So that's why they are called advanced directives because it needs to be the decision of that person that leaves it in writing. So nobody has to guess, but just follow his or her decision, which is not so straightforward always, but it's a way of anticipating. And that is a very compl- that's a very important process because also the idea is to have the time to discuss properly with the doctor on what are the possible use because it's very difficult to do advanced directives like a blank check because there are many things that can happen and there are many nuances. So that's why it's very important to have a serious conversation with the physician that can give you all the different options and then these directives can be as specific as possible. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Dr. Daphne. So, we also have another question in the chat room. So, if you don't mind, I'll read it out. So, would the rise of AI be any concern to the development of neurotechnology, not only in the medical field, for example, the leak of personal information and data, similar to the case study experience of data being used for research, used to train an AI? So, whether using neurotechnology data to train an AI would cause any like ethical concerns or related issues. So maybe we can have a Dr. Mo or Dr. Daphne, if you guys have any answers to this question, you feel free to.
Well, how about I start first and then Dr. Dafna can
Yeah, sure, we
forward?
can have.
Because for me, I definitely do think that that is a risk. That's something that the rise of AI. Sorry, the question was that the rise of AI causing problems
Common
with
problem with
confidentiality, right?
data leak when you use it to train AI.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like that's a concern from like I think about, right? Like because a lot of people use AI to take over a lot of the administrative tasks. It's very easy to have AI do something that is unexpected. And it's, for instance, it's easy to like mix up data, right? And so that's something that I do believe it is something that is concerning. For me, when I actually do use AI, I don't put any confidential information in it. That's how so far, that's how I am managing it. Maybe Dr. Dafna has a better way of doing it. I know there are some AI that is specifically developed for medical healthcare purposes that are supposedly on guard against these concerns that you have raised. I haven't dug into them as much, so that I do not know. So because I've been using it the old school way, I de-identify everything myself and then use that.
Dr. Dafna?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, this is a super important question because it is indeed a very important problem. It's one of the main problems of using data. I mean, one of the most important things is this intersection between AI and neurotech, indeed, and so using the data, which is private data, to train the algorithms, but also then to create and to design products. So it is indeed using very sensitive data. There is a possibility of hacking this data. So that's also a very important problem. And that's why it's so important to be sure how to regulate very well how this data is collected and how data is used, because, and in fact, that's one, and so that's why data privacy and the cybersecurity are particularly important in this case, because this is the kind of information that they are going to hack. Not all, I mean, it's already very bad when they hack all the medical files or your credit card number or your contacts, but now in this case, they are also being able to hack information that belongs to your brain and your nervous system. So it is indeed a very important problem. And that's why also it's also very linked to the previous question of the informed consent, because informed consent is also which data is collected and how to train neurotechnologies. And many times this is done without our consent. We don't know that they are doing it. And that's one of the important things. And that's why we are, well, I'm not very advanced in that. I'll stop. Otherwise, I will do my presentation answering the questions.
So if I may, I just want to add a little bit more. This is a little bit off our original topic, but since we're on AI, this is something that I have also observed. I didn't get a chance to put into the presentation. So I've started meeting clinicians where they're not just using AI as for the administrative parts, they're actually consulting with AI to like ask them clinical opinion. How do I do things? How do I do clinical things? And that raises a bit of concern for me because AI sometimes hallucinates. So it sometimes says things that don't make sense. And sometimes it just doesn't know better because it doesn't know better, right? And so I I do also worry about the over reliance on AI and ignoring, expertise developed over years, because as powerful as it is, I don't think it's something that it's safe to just completely rely on and taking the human clinical judgment part completely out of it in healthcare.
So we do have other questions. I think we will take one last one and then we will move on with the next session, which is Dr. Dafna's presentation. So let's take the first one in the list. So it's talking about high-risk scans, MRI, from high-risk patients. Shall the data be published online for research purposes, despite if AI LLMs may identify their facial or anatomical structures, inevitably finding the individual from other data, i.e. online photos? If the patients are brain damaged, already do they know the consequences over privacy after participating in these research? Do they have the legal rights and cognitive level for making this decision? Yeah, so it's the first question on the list there.
So basically, if a person has some head injury, can they consent to publishing their, let's say, MRI data, right?
Yeah, and I do think it's also concerning that it says shall the data be published online for research purposes. So it's like because currently maybe these kind of data are quite rare and more research needs more data from these patients. So yeah.
So maybe Dr. Dafna probably knows this a lot better, the research part. I don't do as much research nowadays. My understanding, though, is typically people, they guard their research data. They guard it quite closely. They're not running around sharing them. There are some open databases that, but those are usually government operated. Like there's I forgot the name, but there's a huge database for Alzheimer's people. It consists of MRIs, fMRIs, cognitive test data, all the data you can think about. It's there. I actually used that for my dissertation, right? So, but they're all pretty well guarded. And so that part leaking out, I don't know, it will have to be hacking, which is obviously will always be a concern, right? We're talking about like them literally just hacking your systems and getting it. Otherwise, is that huge of a concern? I don't know. Maybe Dr. Dafna can talk a bit more about that. And then with regards to the other part of the question about a brain injured person, the capacity to consent to releasing that data, well, that depends. One thing we need to be really clear about, right? Just because someone is brain injured does not mean they're incapable. For example, the case study I forgot which case study, but the one that was schizophrenia for like what 40 years and can barely speak or write. If you looked at him, he looked like he's incapable. When I tested him cognitively, his cognitive abilities were, not great. It was low average, but it's still fine. He can still make decisions. You need to support him a little bit. Might need to. I would have to repeat stuff to him a couple of times. I have to get him to answer a couple of times and check understanding, but it's possible. So just because someone is brain injured does not mean they cannot consent. You need to figure. So your question, the second part depends on how brain injured they are.
Yeah, I would agree with this. This last part is super important. Everyone, I mean, indeed, it depends on the damage of the brain, but schizophrenic and other people, even children, have the ability to consent. In fact, in children, there is a concept that is called assent, and it means that they need to be explained in a way that is accessible to them, and they need to understand if it's going to be painful, if it's going to be this, if it's going to be that, and they have to be able to say yes or no. And sometimes you have to remember that some children, for example, if they have been sick and exposed to medical procedures, they will know much and understand much, much better than a healthy child of the same age that will not understand because has never been exposed. So this is, but the first part of the question was about the data, if it's okay to publish it for research. So I think one thing is if the open data, which is open science, no, philosophy of sharing information among scientists in order to sorry, to advance knowledge, and for that there are specific rules in terms of publishing and also collecting data to do research. There are also some specific protocols that is important to follow. I mean, if you are collecting the data to do research, you have to collect it following the rules of the research, meaning informed consent, meaning an ethics committee reviewing, meaning being very clear what is this information being used for, who is going to read it, to have access, making sure that nobody will be harmed even because of your results that are published. So it's important to be clear from the very beginning, what are you going to do with this data? Because it is okay to use it for research, But then you have to follow the processes of collecting it, following the data, the rules of research. But you cannot just collect data and then suddenly I'm publishing, because that's not what the person was asked or agreed to provide the data.
Thank you, Dr. Mock, and thank you, Dr. Dafna, for your answer to the question. And I do think that we also have two more questions, but we will put it at the end of this webinar session, because we may need to move on to the next presentation, which is by our honorable guest speaker, Dr. Dafna. She is the director of the AI Division of Research and of Ethics and Inclusion, and Chief Bioethics and Ethics of Science and Technology section of the Social and Human Science sector of UNESCO. So please may I invite Dr. Dafna. Dr. Dafna, are you able to turn on the camera? If not, then it's also.
I can't. Can you? I don't know if you can guide me a bit, or maybe we don't waste time on this. Whatever you want.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just start sharing your presentation. Just give me a second.
Okay. I apologize because I don't know why am I doing this.
Yes, can you see the presentation?
I can.
Yeah, so please
I can.
feel free to
people
begin
also-
when you are okay. Yeah.
Okay, great. So let me just add it. They're asking me if I'm connected. Okay. Very good. So thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this kind invitation. I just see by the end of the discussion that I missed a very interesting presentation, and I'm really sorry for that. I'm sure, and so maybe some of the things that I would say might have been already referred to, but if that's the case, please let me know so I will go faster. So what I want to do is to talk more about the work on UNESCO in this area, um, and a recent recommendation and document that we have issued in order to address the potential ethical issues of the use of neurotechnology, but also to make sure that the benefits of it can also be ensured. So if we go to the next one, yes, I'm going, no, not to the next one, please. So now at least you can see more or less how I look. No, the first one, when it says a table of contents, I will stay here for a while. So first I want to tell you a little bit why neurotechnology, why ethics, and why UNESCO. I mean, what is neurotechnology? Maybe I don't need to say it because I'm sure that it was already addressed by Dr. Mock. But if you allow me, just and also feel free to correct me, Dr. Mock, or to say it if I'm not saying it very accurately. But in a way, and I will give you the definition of neurotechnology that is in this recommendation of UNESCO. More detailed, but in general terms, these are technologies that are extremely important and useful because they allow us to understand better how our brain and our whole nervous system works, and also the possibility of modifying the way in which this and in which they work. And that is why they are so relevant. And there is where all the possibilities and the promises and also the risks lie, because we are not dealing with any part of the body. We are dealing with the most important and critical part of ourselves, which are our brain, which are our thoughts, our feelings, our motivations. So it's super important to be able to understand them, to understand better how they are produced, but at the same time, it is crucially important to make sure that they are very well protected and that we don't harm people and society by their use. And why ethics? Because ethics is the part of is a discipline that it's part of philosophy that allows us to create to ask the right questions about, for example, why are we using neurotechnology or AI or any other technology or anything? why is it? Who is going to benefit from this technology? Who is going to be affected by this technology? And why are we preferring to use resources, for example, at the level of the government for this and not for other technology or for other disease or for other purposes, like, for example, to provide running water or housing or education or so ethics is about making sure that we are very clear about the values that are driving these developments and that they are and that they were taking into consideration possible benefits and harms. But of course, who asks these questions and who answers these questions is also as critical because, of course, the risks and the benefits will be understood in a very different way. Somebody that has an interest of investing a lot in innovation because innovation seems to be good per se will have one answer. One that, of course, a person that is working on neurological diseases will agree that this is very important. And then what will happen but what will be the answer for people that do not have access to technology, that are afraid of technology? Or that do not understand this technology. So that's why there is a requirement to have a very wide consultation and have these answers collected from as much as possible the different members of society. And of course, there are many different ways of doing it. It's very complicated. I'm not going to go into it, but I just want to say that this is what brings us to the basic of where we are, where we are going, which kind of society we all want. And of course, we will have different views, but we will need to come into an agreement on what is acceptable for all of us, regardless of our differences, and making sure that all of us can be benefited and all of us will be protected. Because I heard that it was said before, and this is definitely at the heart of the work of UNESCO, that technologies have to be, in any case, if they are already being developed, be accessible for everyone and not leaving anyone behind. Now, why is UNESCO dealing with this? Because I don't know how much you do know about UNESCO, but of course, everybody knows this. The most famous thing is the World Heritage sites. And probably because of the work of education, but there is very important role of UNESCO in the sciences and the technology and in innovation. Because as you all know, UNESCO was built after the Second World War, and UNESCO is a very particular specialized agency of the United Nations because all of the other organizations have a very specific mandate. For example, WHO on health, UNICEF on children, the High Commissioner of Human Rights is for protecting human rights indeed, and you have for natural disasters and for humanitarian need. But the mission of UNESCO is to build peace. In the Constitution of UNESCO, it says that wars start in the mind of human beings. So it's in the mind of human beings where we have to build the defenses for peace. So one of the ways of ensuring peace is making sure that we have intellectual and technical collaboration among member states and among everyone in order to produce education, well-being, protecting human rights, fundamental freedoms. And this will definitely bring peace because everybody will be looking not from the political point of view, but from culture, from education, from the sciences, being it human and social sciences or natural sciences. There will be an education and information collaborating together to make sure that this world is better for everyone. So in that sense, the aim of UNESCO is also to make sure that technology is not and research are not done just for the sake of it, but again, asking all the time these questions and saying like, where are we going with this technology? What kind of society, what kind of world are we heading to? Is this going to be a peaceful world or not? And of course, if we have these divides, for sure, this will not be good. So that's why UNESCO has a program on bioethics and ethics of science and technology since 30 years ago, and it has consecutive advisory bodies on ethics and bioethics and ethics of science and technology, the International Bioethics Committee, the Commission of Science and Technology, that are the ones who are identifying what are the next important issues and what we need to think about, and what governments and private sector and society and parents and journalists would need to do, and how they will need to deal with it. And that's why the International Bioethics Committee prepared a report on ethical issues on neurotechnology, and they identified that there were many things at stake. And then the governing bodies, meaning all the governments of the UNESCO, decided that we need to move forward and prepare a recommendation. Now, what is a recommendation? I also want to try to explain this, because a recommendation sounds like very colloquial. It's like, I suggest to you that you do X and Y, but it's much more than that. A recommendation, it's a legal document, in fact, and it's a legal document with specific it is not legally binding. So governments do not have the obligation to implement it, but still they have to report every 4 years what they are doing about it. How are they implementing this recommendation? So there are 3 different documents. One is a declaration, which is only some principles. Then you have a recommendation, which has values, principles and policies, and then you have the conventions, and those are the ones that are legally binding. So this recommendation, that's the name, but of a legal document that still obligates member states to try to deal with them. Can I just go to the third one? Okay, and then at the end I will explain to you what is the recommendation. Okay, thank you. You can move ahead. Thank you very much. So this is, I think probably it was already said, but why the neurotechnologies are so important? Because of what I just said, and probably also was said before, the possibility of this understanding and modifying the way in which our brain and nervous system work. And why is this important? Because, for example, 1 in 8 people currently in the world suffer from mental illness, some kind of, for example, depression. And in depression, you can use these technologies to predict the symptoms when they are going to be started, and also to how the person can respond to treatment. So imagine how many people can benefit from this. They also hold great premises addressing major diseases and conditions like physical disabilities that are related to the nervous system and the dysfunction of this system. So, and neurological disorders, for example, Parkinson's disease, which is terribly, terribly handicapping. For example, stroke is the 3rd leading cause of death in the world, and Alzheimer is the 8th leading cause of death in the world. So as you see, everybody's thinking about other diseases, but these ones that are so related to these diseases that are neurological are so important, and that's why the technologies hold a lot of promises. In Parkinson, the results that we have seen are absolutely amazing, because people that have zero control of their bodies can arrive to fully control their bodies. But I'm afraid that I will probably be repeating things that have been said, so I don't want to go too much into this. And imagine people that don't forget or cannot speak, and then I think I'm going to say that. Now, so then there is another so the neurotechnologies have lots of forms. They can be some things that are implants, but can also be used wearables and things that are not invasive technologies, but for example, some of them, when it includes brain-computer interfaces, we know that it has is so important for physical disabilities to generate speech in people that cannot speak, or they can move prostheses, or when they are paralyzed and they can move one part of the body. They can hear if we use the cochlear implants for people that were born without hearing, without possibility of hearing. And it's also very important to study this activity to determine what persons with the attention deficit and concentration or epilepsy, for example, in these cases, the interfaces can also help us with the diagnosis, with the prognosis, and with the responses of treatment. So this is just some examples, but I'm sure that since you were speaking about clinical applications, you will have had many more. And something that I think is also super interesting philosophically and practically is that they can also help or try to hint, because they cannot have the final decision, or it's like when we have patients in coma that doctors have super difficult decisions and families to make. What do we do? These technologies can kind of be supportive to that as well. If to know if a person will be responsive in a short term. I said philosophically because consciousness, it's difficult to define it also physically, but at the same time, it has a physical component. And also because it's very difficult to assess, but at least if it's just to give you an idea of how far we could go. The next one, please. This is maybe you can go for all of them. You can click because there are several. This was just to give you, but I'm sure that you can do more clicks because there are more pictures, please. More images. So this was just, of course, probably you've seen it in the previous presentation, but they are in the medical sphere, and some of them you will see later can be similar when it's not the medical sphere. You have seen a lot of variety, heavy machineries, but also more portable machineries, portable devices, and implants, and complementary sensor to a device. Can you click further? So you see this big, voila. Then you see the differences. You have the cochlear implant, for example, in the first line, the third one. You see this is so small, right? Comparing to these big MRIs and PETs machines that we have, so you can see that they can be very, very diverse. The next one, please. So what is at stake here? If we are saying that we can do all these things with these technologies, with our brain and brain and nervous system, on one hand is our mental integrity. We have the concept of physical integrity. No one has the right to harm us physically and to invade and to do something with it in our body and without our consent. And this is mental integrity, that nobody can do anything with our brain and our thoughts and our feelings and our motivations without our informed consent. And this is mental integrity. And the problem is that currently there are many things that are not respecting this. The freedom of thought, which is nobody has the right to interfere and act upon my thoughts, because we have the freedom of speech already. I mean, I am free to say everything that I think, but now I have to have the freedom of thought. It became very small. So no, I have the right to be. No, my mind to be protected, that nobody will interfere in the way I'm thinking or how I should be thinking. And since we have these possibilities of intervening in the brain, this is what we want to avoid. Then it's the mental privacy, very closely related, that I want to make sure that nobody is interfering in my mental world. And then there is an issue of identity. Some people, even if this is very positive, that, for example, they can control their movements, at some point they say, or they can control the seizures no, can you go to the next one, to the previous? Yes, thank you. I'll tell you when to move. So these people, the people have some feeling of maybe this is not me, because it's we create the identity of ourselves based on our experiences, of our of our capabilities. So this is also has an impact of who I am, because an identity is built on who was I in the past, who am I today, and how I see myself in the future. So when drastic changes happen, first when you fall sick, and then you are rehabilitated, this is also have changes in your identity. And the two very important last ones, sorry that they're so small, but one is agency and the other one is democracy. Agency is this possibility of making sure that you are making your own decisions for yourselves. Many people think, and at some point we are afraid that there is a possibility of controlling the minds, but also the feeling of I'm not responsible of my acts. For example, in some cases, there are some possibilities for people in prison to tell them, like, you can go to prison for, I don't know, 3 years. Of course, not serial killers, no, but or you can go free, but you will have an implant, and then we can control your aggressivity. So what kind of agency has this person? Is it me that is really not being aggressive anymore, or I'm being controlled? And what happens, of course, if the machine, if something something goes wrong with the machine, and then this person becomes very aggressive? Who is responsible then? What about responsibility? So agency is very important, and democracy is very, very important, because if we are going to be influencing the way people are thinking, and particularly in the applications outside the medical sphere, which is something I will try to focus more in my presentation, then we have a big problem. The next one, please. So, what is important about this recommendation of ethics of AI, or ethics of neurotechnology? The text was carefully crafted and thought about addressing what are the features of neurotechnology that are the central ethical that have central ethical relevance. I mean, we were not thinking only on EEGs or brain or a specific type of brain machine computing, because those things are advancing amazingly quick, and so you cannot do that, because then this document will not be valid tomorrow. So it's important to keep a framework that is agile, dynamic, adaptable to this involving environment and technological advancements, ensuring that is relevant in the long term. So what was important to think about, what are the consequences of these neurotechnologies, which I already mentioned to you very quickly. So approaches neurotechnology, how it's thinking about ethics in terms of ethics of neurotechnology as a systematic normative reflection. What does that mean? That is something that you do constantly. It's not a one shot. It's not one day that you decide you are thinking unilaterally on one specific day. There is a systematic normative reflection, mean that you're reflecting systematically about the wrong and the right, which is based on a holistic, on a multicultural, on a multidisciplinary, on a pluralistic. That means that multicultural and multidisciplinary, it's clear. Pluralistic means that people have different moral views, and an evolving framework on interdependent human rights-based values, principles, and actions that are aiming that society is dealing responsible with the impact of these technologies, not only on human beings and society, but also on environment and ecosystems. The next one, please. So the most important points of this recommendation is that includes the data that and the structure and the activity and functions of the nervous system, and they are referred as neural data. But neural data, even when they are collected outside the medical context, and it covers health, as I just said, and applications beyond health. The definition of neurotechnology is devices, but also systems and also procedures that directly measure, directly access, directly monitor, directly analyze, predict, and modulate the nervous system to understand, to influence, to restore, or to anticipate its structure, its activity and function. Considers neural data as well as indirect neural data and non-neural data, allowing mental states inferences and sensitive and personal. And this is very important because there is information which is called neural data that is collected directly from these traditional devices, systems, and procedures that are collected directly from the nervous system. But it also we also take into account this data that is collected indirectly, like for example, eye tracking, if you're sweating, if your heartbeat, and then you with AI, then you do correlations of these activities of this data with other activities of the person, of the other data of the person, and then you can infer if this person is happy, is depressed, and then you can act upon it. And so this recommendation takes into account all this information and considers all this information as sensitive and personal. Why is it important? Because legally, when data is considered sensitive and personal, needs a specific legal protection. So far, that all the information in many countries, for example, in Europe, with the GDPR, that will be for privacy. Everything that is personal and sensitive is considered what is medical, but not when it's not medical, it's not. So the protection of it's not the same. And that's why in this recommendation, we're considering all the information that can give any hint or inferences about this, about your mental states as personal and sensitive. Neurotechnology is considered also in the whole life cycle, and what does it mean? Who is thinking about doing some research? What kind of device they want to do? How is it built? How these algorithms that are embedded in the technology are taken into account? So all the actors. So it's the researchers, it's the investors, it's the teachers, it's the doctors, it's everybody. And so in every stage, even so here it says very clear, from the conception to the disposal and recycling. Because think about what happens with all these chips and things that are implanted. Then when they are stopped using it, then what happens with them? What are we going to do with them? What will happen to the person first? Are we going to then operate them and taking them out, and then what are we going to do, and what will be the consequences if we put it in I don't know, on Earth, no? That and includes, as I said, as we have been saying, the convergence with other technologies like AI. And that's why it's really very comprehensive document on ethics that we have. It's the broadest that we have. The next one, please. So I'm not going to go into details, but I just want you to see that we have values and principles. The values you can imagine like a pyramid in which everything lies, and these values then need to be translated into principles, and the principles into policy areas, and to concrete recommendations to member states and to other actors. So the values we have, of course, respect and protection and promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms, human dignity, human health, and human well-being as one of the most important things, because human rights are to be protected, to be for the infringement of them, but also to make sure that they can be fully realized. So as we can see, for human health, there is a lot of potential. Ensuring and respecting diversity and fairness, considering cross-cultural perspectives. As I said before, this is very important. Knowledge sharing, global solidarity and international cooperation, sustainability, also in terms of environment, integrity and responsibility in research, beneficence, proportionality and do not harm. Do we really need this technology, or can we solve a problem with a different autonomy and freedom of thought? As you can see, is central to us. Protection of, as I already said, of all this data as sensitive, non-discrimination, that also, you know, that and diversity and non-discrimination goes even into how you you build or you are designing, for example, a cask to measure the activity. A person that has a lot of hair, that has no hair, that I don't know, those things that people do not think about are so important. Accountability is crucial. Even if technologies are super complex, somebody has to be accountable if something goes wrong. We need to make sure that it can be the technology can be trustworthy. There is transparency. That there is public engagement, public empowerment. That we take into account the different types of knowledges. Something crucial that I've not mentioned before, and I'm sure Dr. Mock will be in agreement with me, the interest of the child and protection of future generations. Because, for example, children and adolescents, their brain is particularly, I mean, our brain never stops developing, and that's one of the fantastic characteristics, and that's why after a stroke you can still recover some of the activities or the things movements that you lost, because they can still learn. But there are critical moments of development, which is childhood and adolescent, and they need to be protected particularly from any specific action, because then they can also be more prone to addiction, for example, which is what happens with neurogaming. But that's why I will tell you that's why it's one of the principles, but one of the specific areas. And of course, global justice and enjoying the benefits for everyone. The next one, please. So these are the areas of policy actions. With each of them, I'm telling you here only very big what are the policy actions, but within each of them, there are very specific recommendations and suggestions for member states on what they have to do, and this is on what they have to report every 4 years. So government, how is it investing, use, and regulating these technologies? Data policy, because everything that we have said, the data is the most important part. Security, because these devices needs to be secure. The security of people are of paramount importance. Communication, engagement, and information. How are we using these technologies for these purposes? Gender equality, very important. How specific needs of women are taken into account. How much we also, because a lot of research, not only in neurotechnology, but in many cases are done with men, and then the results are just transpolated to women, but also in terms of their participation of women in the development of these technologies. Health and research ethics, which is huge. This is most of the time I've been speaking about it, so I will not say more. And specific domains of application outside health, education, for example, to make sure that students are, for example, paying attention, that they can concentrate. But this, for example, it could be very good, but at the same time, we have to be careful of not abusing of their first of all, that they know that they want, their parents need to agree, but also that we are not using this information that we are collecting to then bring it to the attention of the parents, and then have consequences on the children, and not to use, and again, because of the delicate part of their development of their brain, to make sure that we don't abuse and we don't create harm. Labor and employment, very, very, again, there are two sides to the coin. On one hand, there could be very good reasons. For example, if you have a driver, and this driver is getting very tired, or there is a sleep problem for people that can fall asleep suddenly. So if you have a bus driver, you want to know if he's not sleepy, if he's fully concentrated, because it's his life and the life of everybody in the bus at risk. But at the same time, if you use these technologies to see if a person is concentrating, is full, using his capacities in full, and you use this as a reason to hire or to fire someone, or to make sure that you use, then you try to use some specific techniques or technologies to make sure that he is better, that he performs better, and this is done for the purposes of making the company more profitable, then it's not acceptable. If you want to do something that is to benefit the health of the person, could be, but only and if the person agrees. And also there is the issue that these devices, same as in education, should not be used outside the labor place or the school. And one is super important: consumer and commercial domains. There is in all this in education and labor, in consumer direct to consumer, there is no legislation whatsoever, so anything can be done. And then in the consumer and commercial domains, you have neurogaming, and you have neuromarketing, and you have a lot of a lot of wearables that they tell you that they will help you to be more relaxed, and all this well-being that they are promising. And these have huge consequences and things that need to be taken into account and to be regulated. First of all the devices that are used outside health, because in health there are very strict processes to make sure that there is a security, that the device has been tested, that we know that this technology is safe to use, that is going to measure what it's saying that is going to measure. But what happens when it's for uses outside medical? There is no bodies that regulate or check this. So we can have promises of these devices that, first of all, we don't know if they are scientifically good, that they have been tested. We don't know if they do what they promise to do. And not only that, they collect information from you. Now, as you know, there are, for example, these earpods that can measure your EEG, your brain activity. But so what happens? And they don't say. So for one of the recommendations in these areas are these products need to be marked as we do, for example, if something is genetically modified, this needs to be said, and needs to be said if it has been tested, what kind of information they are collecting and what they are going to use it for, because many of these do not have this information. And in fact, we have seen in that the policies, the confidentiality policies of many companies, they say they own this data and they can sell it. So this data that they own and sell is the one of your brain. So that's why it's very important. We ask them to say. We also say that they should not. How do you say? They should allow. They should not force you to accept all the conditions in order to access, like we do now. If you don't accept the cookies, then you cannot read the article. Well, here the same. If you don't accept everything, they will not allow you to use. And this is completely wrong. This is manipulation. This is against the informed consent. There is some red lines, for example, in the recommendation, which is for dreams. It's really not. It's forbidden to use in dreams, because many people promise that many companies that they can enhance your dream, or they can enhance your memory and many other things through the sleep, which is not scientifically proven. And in fact, what it happens is that also somebody is collecting all your data, and for what? And also because it interrupts your sleep, and that is it's a public health problem, because if you don't sleep well, sleep is fundamental for all the functioning of the world, of the human beings. Now, very, very quickly to the last two, there are specific users that are considered. Of course, people with disabilities, for obvious reasons. Older people, because there are lots of uses for them, not only because of the dementias and all this kind of diseases, but also because we have to take into account their needs. Children and adolescents are the other ones, and people with mental conditions, which are not the same as people with disabilities, because mental conditions can be very different. It's schizophrenia, but for example, also people victims of violence. And very important, the last one is enhancement, which is when you use these technologies to cure disease. But then when people say, I'm okay, but I would like to have my memory better. I would like to be more, to be alert more time in the day. And so there are lots of questions if this is allowed or not. And one of the main reasons is because these technologies are not available to everyone. And so these gaps between people who are better in concentration and memory because they have access to this, they will be in better positions than others that do not have, and this will create further gaps. And then there is a full plan of implementation that I will not go into it. I think this is my last slide. If we go to the next. This is just to give you an idea. Again, similar functions, but in different sectors. The same kind of things that we can measure. But for example, in one, you are seeing a person in the supermarket or in work. So it depends. There are similar functions of the technologies, but the objectives and the aims are very different. So the next one is the last one, if I'm not wrong. This is the report of the IBC, but if you go to the link, you can also find the text of the recommendation. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dafna, for your presentation. And just let me share the screen to our part. So because we have two simultaneous live, one is on this Zoom and the other one is on Tencent meeting. So there are also a few participants from mainland in the Tencent meeting as well. So let's thank you, Dr. Dafna, for your kind presentation. It is really informative and also inspiring for our young participants who probably it's the first time that they explore this field, because this time our Model UNESCO conference is for secondary school students, and this is quite a new topic. So, but I do see that many of our participants are really interested to engage more in this topic, and they have asked a lot of questions in the chat room. So I'll just follow up with one of the new question, and then we will go back to the previous ones afterwards. And I also see that Dr. Mark is still in this Zoom session. So if possible, then our two experts can also help to answer our students' questions together. And first of all, this question is from Christine. So will you be it says we'll be sending a copy of the presentation to our emails just for future reference. So we will upload the recording of the session online, so you can probably watch the recording if you need future references. Yes. Yeah. So if the participants has any questions regarding contents mentioned in Dr. Dafna's presentation, feel free to ask them in the chat box. So if not, then maybe I'll just go back to one of the previous question, which is, are the chips needed to be replaced after some sort of time, and how is it done? For example, because of lack of energy. So for example, the chips do you mean that the chips implanted in the people's brain for neurotechnology? So if you could clarify the question. Yes. Okay. Dr. Dafna or Dr. Mock, do you have any answers to this question?
I think Dr. Mock is much better placed to answer than me.
Yeah, they are. They do need to be replaced, and because obviously everything electronic, it will die. You know, sometimes it's replacing batteries, sometimes the whole thing needs to be replaced. So after every couple years, let's say like, you know, maybe 3, maybe 10 years, they do need to be replaced. But it's usually that part is usually pretty quick.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, for your answer. So another question is the risks when it comes to cybersecurity, like hacking into the neurotechnology. Is that something that I think we have answered in previous session, but does Dr. Mo or Dr. Dafna want to add more into this field of hacking into the neurotechnology?
I think we addressed it, as you said, in the previous one.
Yeah. Let's wait for the participants to have some more time to think about some questions. But I do have one about previously, Dr. Dafna, in your presentation, you mentioned about the interest of specific groups of people might have different concerns. For example, children in the early critical stage of development, such as adolescents, or for example, for elderly or have people with disabilities. So my specific question is related to the children or the youth. So currently, is there any actual application on children regarding neurotechnology? And because I believe it's still in quite an early stage of exploration. And when it comes to children, usually the ethical concerns are more complicated, or people are more concerned about it. Currently, is there any application in terms of the children field?
Yes, thank you. I would love to hear more also from Dr. Mock, because he's more in the clinical application. But what our concern for, well, they are, as far as I know, they are. But what we are very concerned is that are not necessarily application for health, probably, and for that, for those one, I prefer that he answers. But we are very also concerned of all these applications like neurogaming and so sometimes even some kind of neurofeedback that can create some kind of addiction, because the brain becomes addicted to that, you know. So the idea is to try to control systems with the brain, and then you are playing with them. But this makes so this is it's an addiction at the end of the day, and also and it has this implication particularly on them. And this is what we are really worried, because this is very spread. But I think in the clinical, Dr. Mock will know much more what are the applications in children.
Dr. Mock, would you like to add some on it?
Sure. So in terms of the question was applications with children, right? Yeah, I mean, there's also obviously the standard ones still apply, right? Like for instance, if touch wood, a child does have, significant seizures and it's not really responsive to medication, that is one thing that they might really look into, whether they do need to have a deep brain stimulation device implanted in, right? But then we move away from the more serious, this is very serious when you need to like put something in someone's brain. But we move away from that, then we're also looking at stuff like exactly what Dr. Dafna mentioned about the neurofeedback devices. That's actually one of the things that's receiving a lot of attention in the clinical field nowadays, because the view in the field is that that's relatively low risk, and that there is enough in the studies to show us, the way I see it is that there's enough in the studies to show us there's something there with using that to help improve cognitive function for kids who do have executive functioning problems, ADHD, that sort of stuff. We just haven't quite approached it in a standardized enough way as a field so that we can really nail down what protocol works and what does not work.
Thank you, Dr. Mock. We have a question out of curiosity. So, how safe will the chips be if a lithium battery is installed in the brain area?
So, full disclosure, as again, I'm a neuropsychologist, not a neurologist, right? So I'm not the one putting in these things. I just work with people who have them in them. My understanding is those are generally pretty safe, and my so I haven't heard concerns about that. But that's a good question that I probably want to look into actually a little bit.
Yeah, it's true. It's also for our curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay. Does any of our participants have further questions? If not, then I do see that Dr. Assel is also currently in a meeting. Dr. Assel is the liaison officer and focal point for association and clubs for UNESCO. Dr. Assel, would you like to speak a few words at the end of the meeting, or are you fine with it?
Thank you very much, Americana. Dear Dr. Mok, Dr. Dafna, dear youth participants, our dear organizers, Hong Kong Association for UNESCO, Hong Kong Institute of Education for Sustainable Development. We are very proud to have such great institutions as members of the movement of associations and clubs for UNESCO. I'm glad that today we have, let's say, the second webinar on the ethics of neurotechnology. The first one we had in December, and it was within the fourth UNESCO model for youth from until the age of 35. As I remember, this time we have secondary school children. I'm very glad that we are again discussing this very interesting and very relevant topic. And every time from the presentation of our the experts and from the questions actually of our youth participants, we learn a lot. And I'm quite amazed at the level of the questions, because I for some of the things that secondary school children are curious about, I had no idea at all that these kind of chips exist, and so it's every time very interesting to know. And I think also during this webinar we touched more, I think, on the aspects of the impact and the future perspectives of the development of ethics neurotechnology for children and future generations. And I think this topics needs to be further studied, discussed, and we will think maybe how to expand these exchanges with clubs, with youth, with our sectors. And thank you very much again for this initiative, for leading on this topic now, because it's the second time we organize this event. Very, very interesting presentations. Thank you so much for organizing the international conference that will take place in July, as I remember, in Hong Kong. And this is pre-conference webinar, which will be followed by another one on 10th of April. So we are there to support you in all your in all your efforts, and to promote this kind of initiative and bring aboard more experts and more youth participants from clubs movement and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Assel. Just before the end of our session, because I do see that we do have 5 minutes more, and I think we are able to take one more question, because it's quite an interesting question in the chat room. So it says that it's from Christine again. So can neurotechnology possibly alter an individual's personality or behavior in ways that could violate their personal identity? So if so, how can we tackle this concern to ensure the accountability? So I do think it's a quite interesting question. So at the end of the webinar, I think we do have some time to address it. Dr. Dafna or Dr. Mott, would you like to?
Yeah, I really appreciate this. A super important question. So as I said, there can be different ways of having an impact on the identity. One is because of the specific changes that happen, no, in a person when it falls sick, and it can recuperate. But I think so. What I think it could violate I mean, if we go too far in manipulating, that could, but I don't, I mean, that would be really too much. But still, I mean, so it's not only the identity, it's more than the agency. I think the identity, it's not that much. If I might think it's just about, because the identity is who I am, no? Who I am, and so who I am can change in the sense of, am I the same, or because now I can move and now I cannot move, and so how, at the end of the day, who I am. But what I think is really important is the sense, the sense of agency, and the sense of oneself, and responsibility of being independent. It's like, who, I mean, am I doing this? Am I being manipulated? And that it's really an issue, which is not only identity. It's not if I am myself, because I could still be myself and feel like, yeah, I'm still Dafna, but I'm not so sure if I'm deciding. So my identity is not the thing that was most changed, but my agency, my autonomy, my am I responsible for my decisions? Am I responsible for my acts? Am I responsible for my thinking? And this is really what it is, much more at stake. And yes, there is a lot of violations of human rights that can be there, and that's why, because of the stealing your information, because using it against your will, because using it for future things that you don't know, because using it for training AI for other things, because you are thinking that, that's great, I'm getting relaxed, it's very good that I have all of my eye tracking and my sweating and my brain activity, and it's very good that I have all the information in my watch or in my ring. It's telling me everything. But yes, but what is been doing with this information? Even if you are not have an implant. Now, if you have an implant, it could be even worse. As I said, what happens in the case of the prisoners, no, or imagine soldiers, and that is really, really, yes. And who needs to be accountable? Well, that's why I said that we take into account the whole life system of the technology. Who is building it? Who is designing it? Who is deploying it? And who is actually? So there is a chain of accountability, and and there are many accountable, but there has to be always someone in this chain that is accountable, and at that, it really will depend on the specific case. But that's why, and thank you really for asking this question, because the whole life cycle, that's why it's so important. Because if a doctor says, well, I don't know, I mean, I'm not accountable because I just use this technology, as Dr. Mok was saying, I only asked if this was going to be good, but that's not enough. You are accountable because you decided to use it. Now, if the technology was built wrongly, then the person that built the technology is accountable. So it's a chain of accountability. And that doesn't mean that nobody is accountable, because everyone is accountable. That's exactly the point.
So if I can add on to that, right? Because I think this is a very interesting topic. So part of the answer to your question about whether a person's personality or behavior can be affected depends, or whether it can do something that violates their personal identity, depends a bit on what do you call your personal identity. Is that just your basic needs without regards of environmental constraints? Or does that include, hey, all your consciousness and all the restrictions your consciousness put on you? Because hey, everyone wants things and they want to do things that they know they cannot do. And then we modulate our behavior based off of our understanding of our society, based off of our consciousness, right? But if I looked at it very broadly and understanding your question very broadly, I think could neurotechnology possibly alter personality and behavior and violate personal identity? I think, yeah, it definitely can. In fact, we know that. We know that from all from the clinical studies we see. The famous study about the guy called Phineas Gage. He had a bar stuck through his orbital frontal cortex, and he became a completely different person right afterwards. So the possibility is there. Now, obviously, that was very extreme, right? I'm talking about someone having a pole blasted through his skull and destroying a part of his brain. But that means it's possible, right? It could be maybe, the way I look at it, maybe it could be due to some type of accident, some faulty engineering. It could be due to other things that can go on. So that, the question is possibility. I think that's 100% a possibility, which then leads to what Dr. Dafna was talking about in terms of the chain of accountability, right? Well, how did things get to the way it is now? And that's what, if that unfortunate situation happens, that's how we need to start looking at it.
Thank you, Dr. Mark, for your and Dr. Dafna for your insightful answer, and also thanks to Christine for this very interesting question. We do have another question, but I think we are out of time for this webinar session. So if you do want to reach out to ask our expert about more about neurotechnology, feel free to email us. And we will also help you to forward the questions. So by the end of the webinar, we want to thank everybody. And if possible, could everyone turn on your camera, and we want to take a screenshot of everyone, like a group photo. So if possible, could our participants turn on the camera for a group photo? Thank you. Sure. Let's just wait for 1 to 2 minutes for people to get ready. And it's really glad to see participants from different places around the world. Of course, we have participants from Hong Kong, and we also have those we see from Poland, from the Philippines, and from mainland China, from many different countries. So if possible, please turn on your camera and let's take a group photo. Okay, thank you. Have a few more. Okay, so ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's do one more. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, thanks to everybody for your time, and I'll definitely upload the recordings online later, and I'll share with you guys for your review and also to learn more about neurotechnology. We look forward to see you in our upcoming conference, or you or your students. I do notice that some teachers are also here to probably learn a bit more about neurotechnology to help their students prepare. And thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you for the invitation. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Dafna. Thank you, Dr. Mark. Thank you, Dr. Assel, and thank you, Dr. Olga, for coming to support this webinar session and to help our kids, help our secondary school students prepare better for the upcoming conference and to cultivate their interest to learn more in relevant fields.
Goodbye.
Bye.